Next up, we have Clemson left tackle Jackson Carman, who, I say it for almost everybody, but man, he certainly is an interesting evaluation to do, considering, right off the bat, I would say his film was interesting. We'll obviously touch on that as we get into my grade for him, but I like to go over the pro day numbers and measurables here. Didn't participate in the Clemson pro day, chose not to earlier this past month. Is actually going to host his own little personal thing on April 15th, I believe, which is interesting. He supposedly had a back surgery after last season had ended. So obviously that's fine. Some sort of cause for concern there just in terms of his health. But he did weigh in, which was quite curious because as you'll see here on ESPN, it was listed at 335, was the same, I believe, on the Clemson website. I've seen other sources have him at 345, for example, the Draft Network. They had him heavier than this number, comes in at his pro day, weighs in at 317, which had me scratching my head a little bit, to be honest, because what type of weight has he lost, right? I've had multiple teammates over the past couple of years who had back concerns, and depending on the severity, especially knowing that he had surgery, you'd assume it's pretty serious. There's been guys who they're simply sidelined and out of everything, right? So there's no cardio, there's no weightlifting, no nothing. There's other guys who are able to do stuff, limited capacity, right? So maybe some swimming, things like that, a little bit of biking and whatnot. But with Carmen, then knowing it's a surgery, knowing it's potentially something a little bit more serious, has he lost those 18 pounds of, losing fat, which would obviously be good, but if he hasn't been able to work out, has he actually lost some good weight, some muscle deterioration in that regard? Is he actually a weaker guy now than he was when we last saw him in January when he played his last game, right? There's some concerns there that we really don't know the answer to, right? And that's obviously why these sort of behind the scenes interviews and whatnot, this draft process would be so valuable for a guy like Jackson, to where, if he doesn't check the sort of medical evaluation concerns, I think that he could have a certainly lower grade than I'm going to give him here. As you see, I'm pretty high on Jackson. I thought that in pass protection on film, I thought he had really good just sort of fundamentals in terms of his footwork. I'll say he wasn't quite the most fleet of foot, right? He didn't have great foot quickness, was sometimes susceptible to speed rushers, particularly when it came to them getting to the top of their pass rushing arc when they start to bend into the quarterback, right? Jackson then kind of has to flip his hips a little bit and turn and run the hoop with them to push them past Trevor Lawrence. And sometimes he'd struggle there in that regard, right? He'd do a good job sliding out, but then once he got to the top of that arc, sort of the turn and go thing, he struggled with a little bit. So not always the most just flat agile guy, which maybe that's because he was playing with something wrong in his back, right? We obviously don't know. Or maybe now after back surgery, he's going to be even more stiff. So there's definitely some concern there. In terms of run blocking, I thought he was certainly solid, right? Maybe not to the caliber of, say, Tevin Jenkins or Jalen Mayfield, but he was certainly right in that sort of next tier for me. In terms of his hands, this is most certainly my biggest concern with him, particularly as a pass blocker, right? Hands seem generally fine as a run blocker, but would very commonly, instead of keeping his hands tight together and shooting them into the opponent's chest or into, if they give him a shoulder, into their shoulder, he would very commonly sort of have his hands low, first of all, and then when he went to punch, they would sort of be erratic and wide, right? He would very commonly, on his bad reps, be losing simply because he's missing with his hands or errant with his hands, and then that guy's able to split those hands, get into his chest, and then whether it's beat him around the edge from there after he clears a hand, or just simply sort of bull rushing him in a sense, and really getting some pressure on Lawrence that way, right? That seemed to be the way he was losing most of his reps. If he can refine that sort of hand placement, one thing that we used to do these last couple of years at Hillsdale is host a youth camp, right? And we would teach kids, 5-6-year-old kids, the fundamentals of being an offensive lineman, right? And one thing that you teach them when you're doing anything with pass blocking, run blocking, right? You want to start by, our coach would call it cupping a bubble, right? You want your hands really tight in here, so that way, hey, as soon as that guy shows you, flashes a shoulder, a chest, whatever it is, you can throw, and they're going to be tight to each other, and you're not going to have that sort of issue where you're Jackson Carman and those guys are splitting your hands, right? But not all the 6-year-olds would get it either, so got to cut Carman some slack in that regard. But no, in all seriousness, it is certainly something he can fix. It's just something that caused most of his losses in college, in my opinion. So it'd probably be the number one priority, at least for me, when he gets to the next level. And this offseason, if a team's going to draft him to be a starter, whether it is at guard or tackle, I think that's probably the number one thing that he needs to clean up. Otherwise, I thought his balance was okay. Sometimes he would be lunging for guys a little bit there, but nothing really concerning. Otherwise, power and strength was a strong suit of his. Of course, now, like I said, after having dropped 18 pounds, potentially more, and maybe having not been able to work out, I'd be interested to know where he's at now. But otherwise, physicality and finishing was certainly good. IQ and awareness was fine, as well as some decent size and length and athleticism. Like I said, definitely not the quickest on his feet. Maybe played a little bit more like Alex Leatherwood in that regard, where you kind of question, would he be a better guard, right? Would he, instead of being a tackle where you're going to have to flip those feet and run the hoop with the guy, would he be better at guard when that defensive tackle is lined up straight in front of you and you can just strike from there? Obviously, with him, he's got to clean up the strike, but I think it's certainly something that he can work on. Overall, then, add in the position premium, comes out to a 78.3, which actually ties him with Dylan Radins out of North Dakota State, who I just did a last video, right? If you haven't seen that video, make sure you click the link above my head. But I think I would give Jackson the slight edge over Radins, because I do think right away we've seen him play against top college competition, right? If we actually go back real quick to the games where I watched him in, I kind of picked out a murderer's row of sense, right? I gave him 2 games against potentially Owusu coming off the edge. I gave him a game against Patrick Jones, Rashad Weaver. I gave him Jalen Phillips and Quincy Roche, right? So I wanted to see how he was able to handle those guys who, most of them are in my first 3 rounds here that I've done to this point. So I wanted to see how he's able to handle those guys. I think he handled them quite well, whereas Radins, obviously, like I said, he's more of a projection in terms of, I don't really know how good those DNs that he was playing at Delaware and South Dakota State and all those various schools they played. I don't know how good those guys were. Whereas Carman, we have clear evidence of him doing solid against already good players. The only question is, how will we be able to translate to some even more better, more refined defensive ends, right? And that's why, like I said, I wouldn't be shocked if you move him to guard. I actually think he projects a little bit better as a guard at his old size, right? If he's going to be a 335, 345 pound guy, with that sort of less than ideal foot quickness, I think that he would be much better served on the inside, actually. I think that there you would see maybe what is less than ideal quickness outside. I think that would actually become a potential strength on the inside, where he would be solid in terms of his mobility at the guard position, whether it's climbing to the second level, pulling around the edge, doing all those various things. I think that I would probably draft him, in all honesty, to be a guard, which after having started 20 plus games, 27 games, I want to say, at tackle, that might be a transition in itself, but I do still think that as long as that back checks out, as long as the medicals are fine and he's all cleared to go, I do think he's a guy that I'd be willing to spend a sort of middle of the second round pick on there out of Clemson. So if you guys did enjoy this video, make sure, as always, you leave a thumbs up, leave a comment in the comment section down below. What are your thoughts on Carman? Do you think he projects better as a tackle or as a guard? I know that's something that there seems to be some dissenting opinions on, so I'd always be interested to hear what you guys have to say. And other than that, make sure you subscribe, right? We're inching closer to 100 subscribers, so would appreciate all the support that I can get. But with that being said, I do think that just about wraps things up here. So I'm mic'd up, now I'm micing out. Peace, guys.